CBC News has learned that the federal government has filed new court documents as part of ongoing litigation. Now, it's the compensation process for residential school survivors. The government alleges that criticism from advocates and survivors themselves have undermined public trust in the process. The government now asking for an independent review. This is all from reporting by Jorge Barrera, and he joins us now from Ottawa. Jorge, thanks so much for joining us. Can you tell us more about what the government is requesting?
So Crown and Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett recently announced that the federal government was seeking to have an independent review over the way it's handled compensation cases from St. Anne's Residential School, which is one of the most notorious institutions in the history of residential schools. And what CBC has obtained is the government's actual arguments that it has filed with the judges that are responsible for supervising the compensation process. Now, in this document, the federal government says it's done nothing wrong with its handling of these cases, that it has done everything as it should have been done. But the reason it needs its review, the government argues, is because of the criticism it's faced about how it handled these cases. And in the document, it has a list of quotes and people who say them as examples of the types of comments and criticism that it says have eroded the public trust in the compensation process. And, among those names is NDP MP Charlie Angus. It has his tweets. It has some statements he's made in the House of Commons. It also includes a statement, it says, came from retired Senator Murray Sinclair, who actually chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's investigation into the history of residential schools. I don't know if we can actually show the statement that's attributed to Sinclair. Now, the statement that it actually uses and quotes from Sinclair, retired Senator Sinclair never said those words. They're actually a paraphrase in a CBC story about an interview that Sinclair gave to CBC's The House in December 2020, where he actually criticized the handling of St. Anne's cases by the federal government, but he actually never said those words. They're simply a paraphrase, and they're made to look like they're his statement. The document also includes statements from former survivors of St. Anne's Residential School, and one of them is Evelyn Korkmaz, and her words are included among the list of statements the government used as evidence. And here's what she said about finding out that her words are used in this way.
I find that very rude and arrogant. I was accused of lying, over-exaggerating my situation, and I was denied my claim.
Now, the federal government has faced over 30 legal actions connected to its handling of St. Anne's compensation cases, and it's spent about $3.2 million in the last 7 years fighting these cases in court.
Okay, John? Jorge, yeah, this is complicated, and it has implications for survivors involved in another legal battle, and this one with the Ontario Supreme Court. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, so this all comes down to thousands of pages of an Ontario provincial police investigation into allegations of abuse at St. Anne's Residential School, which unfolded in 1990, led to charges and convictions. Now, within these pages, it's clear that mental, sexual, and physical abuse was rampant at this school. The federal government had these records when the compensation process began, and it was up to the federal government to provide all the record of evidence for survivors when they go to get compensation, because they needed these records to even prove that they attended the schools, but not these documents. They were not provided. They weren't even mentioned in the history of the school. Each residential school has this history called the school narrative. The investigation was never mentioned. For the first 7 years of the compensation process, there was no word of these records until 2014, when an Ontario judge said, you got to turn over these OPP records. So then the question arose, would these records have impacted all the St. Anne's cases before they were released or not? And that is what is before the Ontario Superior Court right now. Did the federal government lived up to its duties around disclosing of documents, and did this duty also apply to cases that were heard before the records were released? Now, there's already cases about survivors whose cases were heard after the records were released and the documents weren't provided. So some survivors like Korkmaz, feel that this move to get a independent review is actually meant to circumvent this other case that's unfolding. John?
Okay, we'll be watching. I know you will be. Thanks, Jorge. Jorge Barrera
Thank you.
in Ottawa.